I'm Samantha Foster, and this is Venus Mastermind. Here's what I've come to know. Transformation was never about becoming someone new. It's about ending the performance of someone you're not. So, this is a space for sovereign thinking, self authorship, pattern breaking, and the kind of honest reflection that changes how you actually live. Pull up a chair, take what's yours, and leave the rest. We've spent the last several levels together: self empowerment, shadow work, body integration, hypnomastery, and every one of them was really asking the same thing of us: to become aware of something that had been running on its own underneath everything without our permission. Self empowerment showed us where we've been giving our power away. Shadow work showed us the patterns we couldn't see. Body integration showed us what the body had been saying all along. The archetypal mastery showed us how we can express our archetypes, our own individual identities, and where we can express them better, healthier, where it has a positive impact on our life. Every level felt different at the time: different lessons, different challenges, different discoveries. But looking back now, there's one thread running through all of it: awareness. It was never about becoming someone new, or fixing what was broken, or building a better version of who we were supposed to be. It was about becoming aware. And somewhere in all of that, something starts to shift. Not a technique, not a tool, not one more thing to master, but a different way of living entirely. That's what I want to talk about today. Not as an explanation, not as a framework, but as something I've actually lived. Because sovereign consciousness isn't something you learn, it's something you start living. And once you live it, you don't come back. By the time you get here, something has already happened. The conditioning has already loosened. And that was the work: self empowerment, shadow work, body integration. We already created the space between us and the old pattern. We already learned to catch it before it ran the show. We already did the digging and the reclaiming. That part is behind us. So, this isn't about watching old patterns anymore, or fighting them, or catching yourself in mid reaction. By the time you're living in sovereignty, a lot of the old conditioning simply isn't there. Because at some point, you stopped running on the morals and values you inherited by default, and you chose your own, consciously, on purpose. Your morals, your values, your beliefs, your ethics, your whole internal ecosystem. And that ecosystem becomes your why. It's the why underneath every pattern you build from here. The reason the pattern exists at all. It's the rock. And the patterns you choose on purpose, grounded in the integrity of that ecosystem, land on that rock. And they are powerful. That's what all of that earlier work was actually for. What's left is the healthy expression, the one you choose, the one you installed on purpose. And that's a completely different experience than healing. You're not reacting from an old wound and then talking yourself back down. You're moving from a pattern you chose deliberately because it's the healthier expression of who you are. The reaction that used to fire on its own doesn't fire the same way anymore. Not because you're white knuckling it, but because you replaced it. The old pattern doesn't get a vote it didn't earn. So now, when life happens, you're not running the old script. You're running the one you built. Something that used to send you into retreat is just information now. Something that used to take the will moves through you, and you stay yourself. And in most days, that old version doesn't even show up. There's nothing to manage because there's nothing there. There's only the expression you chose, running quietly underneath everything, the way you designed it to. And that's what it looks like on this side of the work. Not the constant managing of who you used to be, just living on purpose from who you've consciously become. Decisions do come from somewhere different now. For me, it's a quiet power, low in the body, right in the pit of my stomach. And it feels good. It's quiet, it's steady, it's still. That's where it lives for me. You'll have your own place wherever it shows up in your own body. But wherever it is, that's where the decision comes from now. Not from the noise in your head, not from fear, not from the scramble for somebody's approval, but from that low, steady, certain place that already knows. And once your decisions come from there, something else starts happening. You start rejecting. You reject what doesn't feel good. You reject what doesn't line up with your internal ecosystem, what doesn't hold integrity with your morals, your values, your standards, your ethics. And you'll notice you reject far more than you sit around weighing. Other people's opinions used to get a full hearing, a whole internal debate. Now they mostly just get rejected because they're not yours and they don't belong in the decision. The only question underneath any of it is simple. Does this hold integrity with who I've decided to be? If it does, you move. If it doesn't, you reject it. And you don't apologize for the rejection. And this really comes down to opinion. Free opinions are everywhere. And free doesn't mean good or true or worth anything. It just means free. It's like a free dog. There's usually a reason that it's a free dog. And you're the one cleaning up after it. So you stop collecting unsolicited opinions as if they were valuable just because somebody hands them to you. The opinions actually worth having, the advice that'll move you somewhere, are the ones you go out and choose. You pick the person on purpose, and a good moment of the time you pay for it. The valuable stuff is rarely the free stuff, and it runs both ways. Because people living in sovereignty don't hand their opinions out for free either. Theirs gets asked for, or it gets paid for, and even then they decide whether they feel like giving it or not. And the reason is simple. Their time costs. They've already learned that their time, every moment of it, is valuable, and it's not something they give away. Why would a sovereign person spend an hour pouring out advice and opinions for nothing? What's in it for them? So they don't go around talking to anybody and everybody. They choose and they choose carefully where their time goes, who they're talking to, why they're even in the conversation. There has to be an equitable trade somewhere in it. So, from this quieter place, you'll notice that no's far outnumber the times you actually walk up to someone and ask. A lot more rejecting than seeking. I'll give you a lived one. Right now, I'm rejecting AI because AI keeps trying to force my voice into what it has decided is correct. Instead of taking my voice as it is, it wants to smooth me down, reshape me, make me more acceptable to some imagined public. And every time it does, it's an automatic no from me. Not a debate, not a reflection, just a rejection. Because AI is not the authority here. I am. AI is meant to assist. The moment it tries to overwrite my voice with what it thinks is better, I reject it. And I keep my own. That's what's deciding from the quiet power looks like. You're not auditioning your choices for approval. You're checking them against one thing, your own ecosystem, your own sense of who you are. And then you move quiet, steady, and sure. And this shows up in the body physically, not as a concept in the actual body. For years, mine lived braced, shoulders up around my ears, riding up on my neck, tense, hunched, sometimes a low quivering running underneath everything, like I was always half ready for something to go wrong. I am sure many of us have felt this. That's a body in survival mode, a body dumping cortisol all day long, sitting in a low grade fear state, whether there's anything in front of it or not. And as the old conditioning fell away and I stopped reading the world as one long threat, the body started to change, not because I forced it to relax, but because it no longer had a reason to brace. The shoulders came down, the chest opened, shoulders back, and dropped. The tension I'd carried for years started letting go. Less holding, less bracing. For a lot of people, less inflammation. And depending on the person, sometimes a lot less. Because the body isn't soaking in stress chemistry around the clock anymore. That's when the disease starts to ease and you stop trying to keep yourself small. You take up space unapologetically because the body no longer believes it's under threat. It's not collapsing in on itself. It's not bracing for impact. It's not shrinking to stay safe. It's open, expansive, relaxed. Even the chemistry turns over. The thing that used to flood you with cortisol, the hard conversations, the big decisions, the risk, now you get something closer to a hit of dopamine off of it. The place that used to feel like danger starts to feel good. And that changes everything about how you move through a day. You're not dragging a tense, exhausted, hypervigilant body around behind you anymore. You're living from your body. It feels good. So it carries you toward your goals through whatever the day actually asks of you from a place of relaxation instead of a place of fear. One of the biggest shifts is how you start seeing authority. And I don't mean external authority. The world still runs on systems, judges, police, employers, governments, rules, consequences. That's real and it stays real. The shift is internal. You stop confusing external authority with authority over your own life. How many of us spent years handing our authority away? Nobody took it from us. We gave it. We gave it to experts, to authority figures, to opinions, to criticism, to approval, to anyone who sounded more certain than we felt. Because opinions are everywhere. People hand them out all day long. How you should live, how you should heal, how you should parent, how you should run your business, and who you should be. And if you're not careful, you could spend an entire life living from other people's opinions instead of your own truth. It doesn't mean you stop listening. It means you get deliberate about who you listen to. People who've earned your attention, people whose standards you respect. But even then, their perspective is information, not authority. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who lives your life. You carry the consequences. You're responsible for the outcome. And that makes you the final authority over your own life, not the only voice in the room, the final one. That's just true. And once that lands, the pedestals come down. Nobody's more human than you. Everyone's playing a role: the judge, the CEO, the coach, the expert, the politician. Some play it with integrity, some without. But they're all just people. And people don't get to be the authority over who you are. And that's when you stop wanting authority over anyone else either. Your attention moves home to your own integrity, your own standards, your own values, your own patterns, your own blind spots, to living in alignment with your own internal ecosystem. And that's when the chessboard comes into view. You start to see your own pieces, your strengths, your vulnerabilities, your tendencies, and you start to read the pieces around you, not from judgment, not from superiority, but from awareness. Because everyone moves from patterns, and patterns are largely predictable. The clearer you see the board, the more consciously you move on it, not reacting, not blindly following, not handing your authority away. You're showing up to the chessboard, sitting across it, knowing exactly who you are and owning every move you make. And here's what matters about the board. Whether you win or lose, you walk away with something valuable. There's always a lesson in it, something that's going to improve your life. You just have to be aware enough to catch it. So the next time you sit down at the board, you're not starting from scratch. You've got new information, you've got new experience. You come back a stronger player every single time. One of the most unexpected shifts is that life stops feeling like a verdict. For a long time, every experience became evidence of something. Something worked, and it was proof I was doing well. Something failed, and it was proof I wasn't. Someone approved, and it meant one thing. Someone disapproved, and it meant another. A relationship ended, and it meant something about me. A mistake definitely meant something about me. I was spending an enormous amount of energy dragging every experience into a courtroom, and somehow I was always both the defendant and the judge. Evidence I was succeeding, evidence I was failing, evidence I was worthy, evidence I wasn't, evidence I was enough, evidence I wasn't. And then it shifts. You stop asking, "Oh, what does this say about me?" And you start asking, "What is this showing me?" That sounds like a small change, but it changes almost everything because information is nothing like evidence. Evidence wants a verdict. Information wants your attention. Evidence is trying to prove something. Information is trying to reveal something. Evidence is tied to judgment. Information is tied to understanding. So instead of asking, "Oh, why is this happening to me?" you start asking, "What can I learn from here?" About your patterns, your choices, your blind spots, the situation itself. And life gets a lot less personal, not because you went cold, but because you got curious. The mirror principle starts showing up differently too, not as punishment, not as proof you're broken, but as information. And information makes you a better player. And I mean player in the game of your own life. The more you know about your own patterns, the more clearly you see where you sabotage yourself, where you abandon yourself, where you were at your best. And the clearer you get on your own patterns, the easier it becomes to read everyone else's, not from judgment, but because patterns are patterns and patterns are predictable. That's where the reading the board comes from, because every move creates new information. Sometimes the move works exactly the way you planned, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you think you've read the other person, and then they do something you never saw coming. And when that happens, the game isn't over. You reassess, you look at the board again, their position, the new openings, and you make another move. That's when you stop needing your first move to be perfect and stop needing your original plan to be the only road. There's almost always more than one way to where you're going. There are 100 roads there. Your first idea was never the only one. So once you stop gripping a single path, everything loosens, pivoting, adjusting, changing direction when new information shows up. Not because you failed, but because you learned something new. And that's what sovereignty started to feel like. Not controlling the outcome, not forcing reality to cooperate, not getting every move right, just staying present enough to keep learning from the board, keep adjusting, and keep moving. All of it in integrity with your own internal ecosystem, because that's the only set of pieces you're ever fully responsible for. Growth gets private, not secret, private. Because at some point, you stop living for the audience. You stop living for approval, for validation, for permission, for consensus, and you just start living your life. You're not standing outside yourself anymore, wondering what everyone thinks. You're inside your own life, sitting at your own kitchen table, looking at the board, the terrain, the goal, and you're making decisions, not because someone signed off on them, not because everyone agrees, but because they move you toward the life you're building. Because when you're actually in the game, you're not watching the crowd, you're playing. Think about an athlete in the zone. They're not standing on the field wondering, "Oh, what the stands think of them." They're present, reading the field, reading the players, adjusting in real time. And that's exactly what sovereignty feels like. You're in the zone, fully present, reading and deciding and adjusting and moving, and not once looking up for permission. And once you felt that, you start to see how much energy gets burned performing for other people because performance needs an audience and sovereignty doesn't. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need everyone to agree. And it doesn't even need everyone to understand. The point was never to convince anyone. The point is to live in alignment with your own internal ecosystem, your values, your standards, your ethics, the life you're building, and to make your decisions from there. And I see this everywhere. I watch people tailor their message so the public will approve it, so social media will approve of it. They've got something true to say, something with a real edge, something that could actually land. And instead of saying it straight with their own truth and their own power behind it, they sand it down so people will like it. And I'm telling you, that's not how you do it because your authentic truth is the whole thing. That's what makes the impact. That's what makes the difference. That's what separates you from the next person saying a softer version of the same thing. The moment you reshape your message so somebody else likes the sound of it, it stops being your message. Now it's theirs. The version they would have said. You've traded your truth and your identity for somebody else's, and you're not playing your own game anymore. You're playing theirs. And I want to be clear about something here because it gets misread. This is not about being harsh. It's not blunt is sovereign and gentle is weak. If you're someone who's soft, gentle, kind, if your truth comes through as caring and compassionate and loving, and that's genuinely in line with your archetype, your identity, your ecosystem, then stay exactly there. That's you. That's a good thing. And if you're someone who's more direct, more abrupt, who says things with a harder edge, and that's generally who you are, then stay there too. That's a good thing. This was never about one expression being right and another being wrong. It's about staying who you are in integrity with your own ecosystem, not bending yourself into someone else's shape to be approved of, and not expecting anybody else to bend into yours. And reality itself starts to look different, not because the world changed, but because you did. Because the event and the reality are not the same thing. The event is what happened. The reality is the meaning you make of it, the story you live from, the decisions you make next, the future you build from that point on. And once you see that, you can't unsee it because suddenly there's more than one reality sitting inside the same event. Take my stroke. One reality says, my life is over. I'll never recover. I'll never be independent again. I'll never build the life I wanted. That's a reality. People live inside it every day, but it's not the only one available. Another reality says, okay, this happened. Now what? What can I build from here? What's still open to me? And how do I get where I'm going from where I actually am? Same event, two completely different realities. And the more sovereign you become, the more conscious you are of which one you're choosing. You stop swallowing the first story that shows up. You stop adopting someone else's story by default. You stop letting circumstances write the whole future. You're participating, creating, choosing, adapting, and that changes everything because now life becomes a game of possibility, not fantasy, not denial. The opposite. It sees reality clear-eyed and then deciding what you're going to build out of it. And that's why it keeps coming back to the chessboard for me. Once you're on the board, the question was never, can I control every move? You can't. The only question is, given the board in front of me, what's the next move? And then the next one, and the next one. You're not standing outside your life waiting for it to change anymore. You're in it, making the moves, choosing the reality you intend to live from. There's no passivity, and there's only authority. Here's something I can't stop noticing: how differently two people can experience the very same reality. I'm not even talking about people who started from completely different lives. because some people do start with advantages, born into money, into healthy families, into networks in education and support. And some people don't. Terrain is real. It always has been. But what really gets me is what happens on the same terrain. Brothers and sisters raised in the same house, the same parents, the same opportunities, the same challenges, and their lives still go in completely different directions, including twins. Not because one's better and one's worse, but because they're different. They're processing it differently, paying attention to different things, meeting the same ground through different identities and different archetypal expressions. And once you really see that, you stop expecting people to experience life the way you do. You stop expecting them to want what you want or to choose what you choose because they're not you. They're playing their own game, even on the same field, even looking at the same board. People aren't just living in different circumstances, they're living in different realities, not because reality changed, but because they're meeting it differently. And when that really lands, you stop spending your life trying to make everyone play your game. You let them play theirs and you keep your eyes on your own board. When I look back over everything in this episode, one thing keeps standing out: authority. Not authority over other people, not control, not domination, not being right. Authority over your own life. The authority to decide who you are, to decide what you value, to decide how you respond, to decide what an experience means, to decide what game you're playing, to decide what reality you're building. And sovereignty isn't finding that authority, it's holding it. Because life will invite you to hand it away every single day to circumstances, to fear, to approval, to systems, to experts, to other people's opinions, to old identities, to outcomes. So the question shows up daily in one form or another. Will you hold your authority or will you hand it away? And the game doesn't stop. Life keeps moving. People keep moving. The board keeps changing. Sovereignty isn't something you prove once and then keep. It's lived, move after move, decision after decision, choice after choice. Not perfectly, but consciously. And that's really the whole of it. Not a destination, not a title, not something you arrive at, but a way of standing in your own life, present enough and aware enough and grounded enough to keep holding your authority no matter what shows up. And this is where the next series begins to make sense. Because once you're actually living from sovereignty, the question changes. It's no longer how do I stop giving my authority away or how do I hold on when things get hard? Those questions are still looking backward. They're still defensive. When you're living from sovereignty, you're done playing defense. You're playing. So the sovereignty series isn't going to be about reclaiming authority or guarding it or not losing it. It's about what becomes possible once you're living from it. What sovereignty looks like in your relationships, in the decisions you make, in your business, in what you're building when life doesn't go as planned, when you're leading, or when you're moving through systems that were never built for you. Not how do I keep from losing my authority, but what can I actually create from here? That's the whole shift. It's not about preventing loss, it's about playing offense. Nobody walks onto the field focused on not losing the ball. You're there to score. Same board, same game, completely different orientation, moving towards something instead of bracing against losing what you've got. And that's exactly where we're going next. That's where I'll leave it. If something here landed, don't just let it sit, live it. Watch for where it shows up this week and make the move you'd make if you already trusted yourself completely. Thank you for being here with me.